Before we dive into today's episode, I want to share something with you that I genuinely believe in. If you are facing divorce and feeling overwhelmed, and I know you probably are, I want you to know that there is a better way to navigate this process. And that is why I am proud to partner with Hello Divorce, founded by my friend and CEO, Erin Levine. Hello Divorce offers a structured, step-by-step approach that helps you move forward with clarity instead of chaos. You get transparent guidance, access to legal support, mediation options, financial resources, and tools designed to reduce conflict and save both time and money. It is built to help you make smart decisions from strategy, not fear. If you want a more thoughtful and efficient path forward, visit hellodivorce.com/Susan to learn more.
Listeners, let me tell you something that might surprise you. Most people don't get hurt the most during their divorce. They get hurt by what they agreed to at the end of it. And what we're seeing across the board right now from attorneys, mediators, and post-divorce litigation trends is that many of the most expensive problems people face later are coming directly from how their agreements were structured in the first place. Not right away, not dramatically, but quietly over time. It might be 6 months later, a year later, sometimes 5 years or more later. When something stops working, when something in the agreement isn't clear, when something they thought was handled suddenly isn't. And they find themselves saying, I didn't realize. I thought this was included. I didn't know that could happen. And the hardest part is often there's very little you can do at that point because the agreement is already signed. So today I want to walk you through the 5 most costly mistakes people are making in divorce agreements right now, the patterns that are showing up again and again, and how you can avoid them. Because this is not just about getting through your divorce, it's about what you're going to live with after it.
Welcome to Divorce and Beyond, a podcast about navigating divorce and what comes next. I'm Susan Guthrie. I'm a divorce attorney and mediator, and for more than 3 decades, I've helped people navigate divorce with clarity, strategy, and compassion. Each episode offers practical insight into the legal, emotional, and life decisions that shape your future. So let's get started.
Today, we're talking about the 5 most costly mistakes people make in their divorce agreements, and, most importantly, how to avoid them before it's too late. Because what you agree to at the end of your divorce is what you are going to live with long after it's over. So let's start out with the reality versus the resource. We spend so much time focusing on getting through the divorce, through the negotiations, the emotions, the decisions. But what we're seeing is across more and more cases, the real issues don't show up during the divorce, they show up after. Because a divorce agreement is not just paperwork. It's a blueprint. And when that blueprint has gaps, ambiguities, or unrealistic assumptions built into it, those issues don't disappear. They surface later, often when it is much harder and honestly more expensive to fix. And one of the biggest trends we're seeing right now is an increase in post-divorce conflict tied directly to poorly structured agreements, which is exactly why I created something to go along with this episode. You know, I like to give you guys resources. So it is called Before You Sign, 15 questions to ask before you sign your divorce agreement. Because this is one of those moments where having the right questions in front of you can completely change the decisions you make. So if you're anywhere near finalizing an agreement, go download that from the show notes or the website and actually walk through it. Not later, now. If this topic is sounding a little bit familiar, there is a reason. In a recent episode, I sat down with attorney Kelly Lease Murray. We talked about what happens when divorce agreements aren't enforceable, when the house is not refinanced, although it says it's supposed to be, when retirement funds aren't transferred, when one party simply doesn't follow through. That episode was about what happens when things break down after the divorce is finalized. But here's what I want you to understand about this episode. In so many of those situations, the real issue didn't start with enforcement. It started with how the agreement was written in the first place and how it was negotiated. And that is what we're talking about today. Because if you can get this part right, you dramatically reduce the chances that you'll ever be dealing with enforcement issues later. Down to the mistakes. Mistake number 1. And boy, have I seen this over my 35 years of practice. And that is rushing to be done. This is the most common mistake we see. And it's becoming even more prevalent. People are rushing to be done with their divorce. And it's not because they don't care, but it's because they are exhausted. They are emotionally, mentally, and financially exhausted. We have been doing episodes on this topic. Check out the one with Erin Levine recently. She's talking about how you're exhausted before you ever even start your divorce. Then you go through the process and you become even more exhausted. And in that moment, short-term relief starts to outweigh long-term thinking. Across cases, this is one of the clearest patterns. Agreements that are finalized quickly, under pressure, are far more likely to create problems later. I had a client who pushed to wrap up everything as fast as possible. They wanted to be done with this. They wanted to be ready to move on. They felt this was holding up their beyond. Everything looked fine on paper. Nothing jumped out as a major issue until about 8 months later. And that was when the agreement simply did not work in real life. And by then, we weren't negotiating anymore. We were trying to fix something that couldn't easily be fixed. Because here's the part that no one says aloud. The agreement you rush through today is the one you wish you had slowed down for later. Before you sign, you have control. After you sign, you have consequences. So do not rush. Take a deep breath. Make sure that you are negotiating and take into consideration the 4 other mistakes that we're going to talk about in this episode. So mistake number 2, not having a clear understanding of the financial reality of what you are agreeing to. This is another major pattern that we are seeing. I have seen it throughout my career, but honestly, it really seems to be coming to the forefront now. Financial misunderstanding. And honestly, this isn't about intelligence. It's about context. Divorce forces people to make complex financial decisions in emotional moments. I have often said in this podcast myself, and many of my guest experts have also said, the biggest problem with divorce is you are called upon to make some of the biggest decisions of your life at a time when your emotions are at their lowest and worst point. So divorce forces people to make those complex financial decisions in those emotional moments, and that combination is very dangerous. I have had many clients who agreed to keep the house, who fought to keep the house, who made it the primary goal of the divorce negotiations. And on paper, and in that moment emotionally, it looked and felt like a win. But what those clients did not always fully account for was everything that came with the house. The mortgage, the upkeep, the taxes, the reality of carrying that home on one income and with one person's effort. Houses are a lot of work and a big expense. Often, these clients end up in their attorney's office 6 months, a year, a few years later, not because they made a bad decision intentionally, but because they didn't fully understand the decision they made. And what we're seeing across cases now is this: when people don't fully understand the long-term financial impact of their agreement, those agreements tend to break down in real life. You need to realize that in divorce, confusion is not neutral. It's expensive. So if you do not fully understand something, that is your flashing red sign to slow down, not move forward. If the house is actually one of the issues, we have several episodes in the archive. Look for one with Tammy Wallensack, who is a divorce mortgage expert, or the one with Kathy Clark, a top real estate agent, talking about the divorce side of real estate. Those are two really helpful episodes in the archive. We'll link to them in the show notes. But if you are feeling confused around the finances, make sure you get the support that you need to make sure that the financial decisions that you are making in the divorce are going to work in your beyond. The professional for that is a certified divorce financial analyst, a CDFA. Also have tons of episodes with fabulous expert CDFAs in the archive. Go to the website, use the search tool, put in CDFA. It's going to pull up a ton of episodes because this is a critical factor and a huge mistake that people often make. The third mistake is vague agreements. And this one pops up all the time because sometimes we don't have a crystal ball. Right? We don't know what's going to happen in the beyond, or things happen in the beyond that we never imagined. And so this is one of the fastest growing sources of post-divorce conflict. It is vague and poorly defined agreements showing up again and again. I personally believe that the pandemic sort of started this, pushed this issue up, because certainly who could have ever seen some of the ramifications that the pandemic had on people who had negotiated divorce agreements based upon, say, the income that their then spouse had, and then that spouse lost that job because of what happened during the pandemic. There was so much job loss, job changes, etc. So vague agreements or agreements that don't cover situations that might arise in the future, that's starting to show up again and again. You know, the other reason is because when we're drafting these agreements, we often will try to build flexibility in. And it sounds good in the moment. It feels cooperative. It feels mature. I hear this from clients, or I've heard it so many times. Well, we'll figure it out when it happens. We'll be reasonable. Don't worry, Susan. We're grown-ups. We can handle this. Again, we will figure it out. But what I have seen over and over again in practice is you cannot figure it out. And if you don't have guidelines in your agreement, vagueness does not create flexibility as you hoped or wanted or intended. It creates disagreement. And disagreement creates conflict. Because what feels reasonable to you today may not feel reasonable to you or your ex later. Clarity is not conflict. Clarity, in fact, prevents conflict. So if it matters to you, define it. If it could be interpreted in 2 or more ways, then it will be interpreted in 2 or more ways in the future. Drill down and define it. Take the time, spend the effort, and make sure that the terms that you care about are very clearly defined. Mistake number 4. And this ties in with the other ones, and it's really the most human of mistakes, and that is emotional decisions that have long-term consequences. These really are, built into the human dynamic, but they can be one of the most costly mistakes. And what I'm seeing consistently is that emotional decision-making during the divorce process leads to long-term consequences that people did not anticipate because the decision solved your emotional moment. It took away the pain or the issue you were feeling, those negative emotions you were feeling in that moment. It solved that immediate problem, but it didn't support your long-term reality. It did not support your beyond. We see this all the time. You make the decision in the moment to avoid conflict, to feel fair, to move things along. And it does in that moment feel like a relief. I acknowledge that. I've been there myself. But later, it can feel like regret. How many clients, this is one of those, if I had $1 for every client who said to me, I wish I had taken more time to think that through, or I wish I had not agreed to that. In fact, somebody just sent me a DM on Instagram that said it was something, I felt guilty about the divorce. My ex was so crushed and he really wasn't a bad guy. So I really didn't push for what probably would have been a fair financial settlement. I let him keep more and didn't really fight. And now, years later, I really regret that decision. I've heard that more than once. So here's the question I want you to ask yourself. Are you making this decision for your future, for your beyond, or for your feelings right now? To make yourself feel better in this moment. It's a simple question. It's an uncomfortable question, but ask it, because facing it now is going to save you a lot of heartache, a lot of conflict, and potentially a lot of expense in the future. All right, and mistake number 5. And this one, I'm surprised in the list when I was doing my research on this. I'm surprised it didn't come out on top. But I think that it's because this is something when I have worked with clients, and certainly I hope if you have listened to the podcast, you have heard me talking about the fact that you need to do this one thing while you are going through your divorce. In fact, I named the podcast Divorce and Beyond because the mistake number 5 is not thinking about the beyond. It's not thinking beyond the divorce. This is one many people overlook, and it is one of the biggest drivers of future problems. The problem is when you design your agreement to resolve only what's happening in the present, but your agreement is not built to support your future, your children's future, there is a gap where things will break down. right? So it could be, what does your monthly life actually look like? Expenses, where you live, the type of housing that you have, your parenting plan, your children's schedules, all of these things. Do the agreements you are making today support your lives beyond? What happens if something changes? Because here's something, big surprise, spoiler alert, things will change. No one's lives stay exactly the same. How are you going to deal with changes? When you look at your agreement, can the structure that you are negotiating realistically support you? This is one I see all the time with the marital residence. If you negotiate keeping a marital residence and then negotiate a financial settlement where every penny of your money is going to support the home, when your support ends, what's going to happen to the home unless you're able to replace that support income? That's just one example. Happens all the time. All the time. And understand, it's not because the attorneys are not pointing this out. I've pointed this out many, many times to clients, but who's the ultimate decision maker in your divorce? You are, at least as to what you can and cannot live with and what you will agree to. We can only give advice. We can only guide you with what we know and understand. That's why I'm telling you these things, because another red alert for you is if you hear your attorney saying the things that I'm saying, pay attention. They're trying to help you, right? It's attorney and counselor at law. That's our title. We give legal advice, legal representation, and legal counsel, legal advice. You need to look at if what you are negotiating will actually take you and support you into your beyond. I've seen agreements post-divorce that looked perfectly good on paper and then completely failed in real life because they weren't built for real life. They were built for paper numbers that were not realistic. A good agreement should not just resolve today. It should support your future. And here's the hard part. I know that looking at that future is hard because when you were in the marriage, the future had a certain defined appearance, right? You knew to a certain degree what that future was going to look like, and you had that picture for however long you've been in this relationship. And suddenly that is gone. It is gone. And you have to look forward into what I've called before the big black abyss of beyond. But look at this as an opportunity to create the beyond that works for you in your new future, for your children, for you. And look forward with hope as to what will work for you and make plans so that mistake number 5 does not come back to haunt you when you're done negotiating your divorce. So let's bring this all together, because if there's one thing I want you to take from today's episodes, it's this. These are not isolated mistakes, right? They're patterns that are showing up across cases, across families, and across time. I've been in practice for 35 years. There has never been a year where I have not seen these mistakes, where I have not seen these errors. The good news is, once you see the patterns, you can avoid them. That's why I did this episode. That's why I created the downloadable checklist for you. So if you take nothing else from today, remember this. Fast is not the same as smart. If you don't understand it, don't agree to it. Vague agreements don't create flexibility. They create conflict. Get as much specificity as you can into your agreement. Remember that emotional decisions may feel good right now. They may feel like they end your emotional limbo or your fear or your anger, but that can and probably will come back to cost you later. And your agreement should support your future, not just end your marriage or this relationship. Listeners, before you sign anything, I want you to pause and go download the checklist I created for you. It's called Before You Sign, 15 Questions to Ask Before You Sign Your Divorce Agreement, right? Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in this process is ask better questions and make sure the decisions you're making today are the ones your future self can live with. And if you haven't listened to my recent episode with Kelly Lee Murray on what happens when agreements aren't enforceable, I highly recommend you go back and listen to that next, because together these two conversations show you both sides of this coin. What happens when it goes wrong, and also how to prevent it from going wrong in the first place. And as always, I'm here, Divorce and Beyond is here to support you not just through your divorce, but beyond it.
If today's episode helped you see something more clearly, take a moment to reflect on one insight you can carry forward, one decision you can approach differently, one next step that feels more grounded. Divorce is not a failure. It is about facing reality and choosing a healthier path forward for yourself and your family. You can find show notes, trusted divorce resources, and expert guidance at divorceandbeyondpod.com. If this episode was helpful, follow the podcast and share it with someone who may need support right now. I'm Susan Guthrie. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back next time with more clarity, insight, and support on Divorce and Beyond.